Welcome back to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm Gail, Shalan, and we are so glad that you're joining us today for this conversation. But first, I'm going to turn to our hosts with a very important question, and it will be relevant in a moment, I promise. Thanks to our lovely guest, I would like to ask, if you were a Muppet, which one would you be today? Lindsey?
Hi, Gail. Gonzo. It's almost always Gonzo is the answer to that question.
Solid. Deanna?
I'm totally Janice.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like all the time.
Yeah,
I
all
love
the
it.
time. Always.
Yes.
André?
I have such a less specific relationship to the Muppets than y'all, but I've always connected with the little orange guy with the tiny little glasses and the little, the green jacket. You know who I'm talking
Beaker.
Yeah, Beaker.
No, he's talking about Scooter.
Yeah.
Scooter's the jacket.
You have the
That
stage
stage
manager
manager.
energy.
Stage manager
Yes.
energy? That's so true.
I love it.
Yes.
Amazing.
I'm feeling like real hyped up today, so I'm just going to go with animal because that's fun. So let's get down to it, and we'll come back around to the Muppets, I promise. So creative, multi-hyphenate, storyteller, artist, these are some labels for what we do and how we do it. And they're an attempt to consolidate a broad variety of unique creation-based skills and endeavors that make up our particular journeys and potentially summarize our careers and intentions. But how useful or necessary are they? In fact, and I really am asking this because I don't know the answer, how useful and necessary are any self-adopted labels in this time when we have so much increased agency in how we represent ourselves? Limitless opportunities to engage and market ourselves, plenty of labels and judgments put upon us from the outside, and more ease than before in connecting and collaborating, but a constant demand to label ourselves, to define ourselves, spotlight ourselves, and a rapidly increasing sense of pressure around resources such as our time and energy. We are constantly asked to make adjustments in our businesses and our artistic processes to streamline for efficiency, to make things, in our guests' words, quicker and easier for the folks who are giving us work. And my question is, at what cost? How do we know where to draw the line? Where can we even draw the line? Is that our line to draw? Should we resist this pressure and slow down, say no more often, and make our boundaries clearer? In the pursuit of telling intricate and often intense human stories, frequently related to our own lived and sometimes traumatically so experiences, our emotional labor, as we've touched on before, needs to be accounted for. Our capacity as unique human beings with our own sets of challenges and obstacles is limited and essential to bear in mind. And while a creative artist can have ideas sprout like gorgeous weeds when inspiration hits, can be deeply conditioned to say yes to anything and everything, at some point, we do have to decide which crops to tend to, what to water, prune, nourish, and ultimately harvest. And this cannot exclusively include crops to sell. We must feed our own soil too. And sometimes we must rest. I've had several conversations with our guest today about honoring ourselves, our desires, our limitations, and our deeper values as human beings, and how we decide what to communicate about ourselves, and what we have to offer to our potential clients, potential collaborators, and to the world at large. So I'm going to welcome to the show Dani Martineck, who is an incredibly accomplished multidimensional creative, an actor and writer for the stage, screen, and audio with a passion for stories that help us feel less alone. To name a few credits, their work on screen has been seen and heard on Blue Bloods, Succession, and in their award-winning short film, The Rushing of the Sea, which is beautiful and now available to the public, so please go see it. They also wrote and produced it. Their short play, Lighthouse, was published alongside several other short works in the collection Beyond the Binary. And they are an Odyssey and Earphones Awards-winning narrator, lending their talents to a wide range of audiobooks for Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, and more. As a person of non-binary gender experience, a decade-plus New York transplant from the South, and an artist with a science background, they feel at home in liminal spaces. They're intrigued by visible mending and are constantly learning ways to thrive with chronic pain and depression brain. Dani is also an enthusiastic but lazy new birder, as I can attest to after receiving some amazing videos of the adolescent pigeons at their subway station last week. And they also told me that they are, here we go, back to the Muppets, some kind of Muppet. Which Muppet? Who knows? They think an order Muppet with strong chaos Muppet tendencies. So that made me think like Sam the Eagle mixed with Animal or Bunsen and Beaker. Dani, welcome. Which Muppet are you feeling most like today?
Thank you so much. And I love this first question. I'm going to take us in a weird other direction and kind of go Muppets adjacent, but still Henson Studios with the Dark Crystal.
Ooh,
I don't know if anyone else remembers
yes.
that, but I'm feeling some Algra energy today.
Okay.
Especially in the sense of sitting down or standing up going,
yes, it is that. Thank you for that. So happy you're here. Okay, so you and I have creative dates sometimes, and a couple weeks ago we met, and we started reading kind of spontaneously upon your suggestion, Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing, Detaching from the Attention Economy. And it's brought up a lot of powerful thoughts that we have sort of thrown back and forth with each other or been stewing on for a couple weeks. One that you brought up that's really sticking with me is life is not atomized and optimizable. Right? Life is not atomized and optimizable. Can we all talk a bit about how that sits with us, about how creating art in the attention economy, as Jenny calls it, and selling and marketing ourselves enough to continue to get the opportunities that we seek, but not to burn ourselves out or damage ourselves? How are we thinking about all of that? Anybody would like to answer? I'd love to hear.
It's interesting hearing your farming metaphors at the beginning reminded me of a TikTok I saw recently. I'm not even going to lie and be like, I read an article. I saw a TikTok.
Attention economy.
Yeah. And it was like a farmer standing in his orchard talking about his business. And he was saying like one of the problems with capitalism for him is the idea that if you can, then you must. And so he was saying like our yield in this orchard on a really good year when like the weather conditions are perfect and everything goes perfectly is X amount. And because we can achieve that kind of yield, then we must. Like then the rates are then set there. I'm forgetting all the mechanics of it, but essentially he was like, then their suppliers or their investors or whoever is like, cool, if you can reach that point, we need you to do that next year and next year and next year and next year. And he's like, that's not possible. Like there's a median that is like an ideal range, but because I can, then I must. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately in regards to like my own work and my own practice and trying to like find my own balance. Cause sometimes I fall into that. I'm like, if I can, then I must. If I can record X number of hours a day, if I can smoosh everything into a tight timeline, if I can just like work and work and work, or that my output on like a really, really good week or a really, really good day needs to be matched every day or every week after that.
Right. Like if you ever have, then
the
you must
change.
Always. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and Lindsey, thank you so much for calling out from the beginning capitalism's role in this, like our overarching economic and sociopolitical and everything system that we, as American narrators, are living under. That drive is not coming from you. It is in us because we've grown up in this system. We're so used to, I must do as much as I possibly can now to save up for next month or next year or next week when who knows what will happen. I might not be able to do this. Or like, I don't know what medical bills are coming down the pike. We don't know, anything could happen. And so it's that constant scarcity mode that is warring with our just being able to live. It's almost like capitalism is inimical to life or something. Who knew?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like these ways in which all these questions of like attention and how they tie back to like our artistic work keep coming up. One of them, I think, has just been like this conversation around like listening speed, right? Because it is an important point of accessibility for a lot of people to like be able to listen at the speed that suits them best. And there is one camp that like specifically, actively, sometimes even against like artistic instincts, insists that audiobooks are about like speaking slowly and paced and like enunciating everything. And then there is now, I've seen some folks who are like, you should speak faster or someone's going to speed you up. Right. And even just that piece, like that piece literally trying to pick the narrator up out of the like the space that they're in artistically, and then prop them into this kind of like back and forth of the attention economy. Like TikTokers talk all the time about how exhausting it is to constantly basically play slots by having to put out videos and dream and hope that one of them is going to go viral. And I just like the idea that more of that is arriving in narration just gives me the ick.
That's so interesting, because also as a listener, I've been thinking about that, because I do speed up my audio for my brain. It really helps. But depending on the content of what I'm listening to, that speed varies dramatically. And I play with that space, like, where is it a little too fast that I'm losing parts of the performance? And so I'm not as engaged. And it comes way earlier in something that has a fully realized, like, creative storytelling energy about it in terms of what the narrator's offered. So I don't know if that matters in any way, but it's just interesting to think about. And also, I've been using Speechify to prep to some degree. Like, I co-prep with Speechify. It helps me keep focused. And it tells me how much more efficient I'm being in my reading, how much more I've consumed in X amount of, and I'm like, this is against the point of what I'm using this for, but like, that's why it's talking to me about that.
That language.
Right. Exactly. Efficiency. Yeah. Deanna, what do you feel about this?
I mean, in some aspects, I agree with each of you, but I also have a different view. So I'll just hit a couple of things. So I listened to everything the way that it was recorded, because I want to know what you did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll figure out why you did it the way that you did it. Do you know what I mean? So I like to listen at the speed it was recorded. And then for what André was talking about, I feel like that's a little bit more of that whole war of quantity versus quality to me, right? And then where I feel like I'm leaning towards a different viewpoint is, I started in this business when photos were black and white. I was a kid, and we had to mail things to people all over the country. And in New York, you had to hand deliver your stuff to be considered. So I've always been my own advocate. In the beginning, I was my own agent. I've always been my own manager, because I do not believe I've met someone who will work as hard for me as I will work for myself. So I'm taking that money as a manager as opposed to giving it to someone else. So that whole thing, some people call it hustle. It's not. It's the business. It's the way the business has always been. And even though audiobook narration specifically is under the umbrella of publishing, it's in this field of entertainment. You're using people that work in other aspects of entertainment, who are working on film, doing other voiceover, working on stage, to do this work of audiobook narration as the artists, as the performers. So that kind of melts in. What I find to be brilliant and beautiful about the fact that it's connected to publishing is we're able to contact people directly for the work that we want to do. That's not the case for commercials, on camera, and stage always. Sometimes you cannot get to the person who holds the keys, right?
Right. Yep.
You only know like the assistants, you only know maybe the monitors who are at the auditions, whoever's emailing you or contacting your agent. So I feel a little bit differently about it, because that aspect of it to me has never changed. The connections are necessary, and that has always been the case. Who is doing the connecting and how the connecting is happening is what has evolved or disintegrated according to what your opinion is, right?
Right.
So it's about what's important. So, I learned from Tina Turner, your name is important. So on any social media that I'm on, I'm there. And I have my name, whether I use it or not, just in case. I mean, what if I blow up real big and somebody wants to sell me my name? I don't think so. So I feel like those are things you have to be aware of. Whether you're doing the research yourself or whether you're in conversation like this with other people. And then I think you need to make a choice. You need to make a choice to dive in. You need to make a choice to educate yourself and or not do it at all, right? But make an actual educated choice of what this means to me, even if that meaning is nothing or zero. And I think a lot of people don't do that. I think some folks are a little apathetic and they feel like it's a lot of stuff being put upon them, but not necessarily, because you don't have to take it on. Going into what Lindsey was saying, like, I think we do have a choice. I think there's some things we have to decide if posting on social media is the way that certain people will see us. Do we want to work for those certain people?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
There's so much agency and so much opportunity for connection that it's become more about like niche appeal and understanding yourself and expressing yourself more clearly to the people that you're interested in continuing to work with. And you don't need to appeal to the masses. It's, in fact, potentially impossible, but also not the best strategy in a lot of ways as well, which actually kind of brings me to another question I have, which is like, so some of us here are multi-hyphenate. I think all of us dabble in many different forms of creative expression and have, professionally as well as just artistically and for our souls. And like, how do you decide? There is some learning of self that you've talked about, Deanna, that you've alluded to, and like accepting of self that is important. But also, how do you decide what you want to follow? Are you fluid with that when the demands are different in terms of how you make those connections or how you present yourselves? Like, what are the strategies or playbooks that you're following as far as that goes?
Yeah, I think that's hard because, and I don't think it's definitive, right? I think it's always a work in progress, not necessarily process, right? Like, where you are in that moment could be completely different than where you're going to be like 2 months from now, or where you're going to be 2 years from now. And all of that, I think, influences you to a certain degree as an artist. Like, I use a lot of my own experiences. I use a lot of the experiences of other people that I know that have shared with me. And I people watch all the time. And I use my imagination to go, oh, this person looks and sounds like this. So what would this be as far as a character? So I think as far as us having the agency of kind of figuring out how we want to work that to our advantage in a certain way artistically is, well, what do you care about? And does it matter to you that you care about what you do? For me, it does. So that's like the first thing. And I kind of have like, is this going to help me? Is this going to help anybody else? Or do I find this harmful? Is this harmful to me? Like you were talking about, what did you say? Emotional what?
Labor? When we're working on things that are like
emotional labor.
Yeah.
I've never been paid for my emotional labor. Most of my roles are specifically written to highlight traumatic experiences, whether they're in audio or on camera or on stage. And I've never been compensated for that labor. Even in the creation of characters or the development of a piece, you know, something that's new, I've never been compensated for that work. So I think for us, we need to make a choice. And we had one of these conversations early on. Well, what does your month look like? Can you pay your rent? Can you pay your utilities? You know, because we've chosen to do something that drives us, like personally, in whatever form that is, but it's also a tangible way to live our life. And so what does that mean for you? Because I think at any given time that can mean many things to different people. And I think that's what the challenge is, right?
And if we're talking about what we can afford, you know, like there's the other end of that being in good health can save you a heck of a lot of money. And if you are going through experiences that are rehashing things in your system or bringing things into your system that are difficult to process, and you don't have the resources to process that, whether that's going and getting physical therapy for that or psychiatric therapy for that, or just space and time to go to a class, a movement class, or take a walk or take a day off. Like if you can't afford that, is it worth taking on the work? And I think that's another thing to sort of contemplate. I know that several of us struggle with inconsistent demands that our bodies and minds can put on us, and that's something that I've had to learn to bear in mind in terms of like longevity, and it's not really consistency, but like just staying in the game, like just that I can't, like you were talking about, Lindsey, like it has to work in cycles. I can't demand the same crop year round, year to year. It's not going to work out for my body, you know?
Another part of this for me, because my housemate works in musical theater, and we have this relationship a lot where he'll describe something like extremely frustrating to me about like a dynamic that's going on or a lack of communication that's happening. And then at the end of his explanation, he'll always be like, but that's theater. And particularly when I was like working in an office setting, which had enough of its own issues, but was really oriented around like feedback, and like did have systems that, like, if they were present in his life or sometimes my life, like would make a lot of it easier. I do feel like there is this piece of it where like I can ask something of the industry that I am helping propel forward. Like my book of 2022 was Work Won't Love You Back. Sarah Jaffe, if you haven't read that book, I don't care what you do, go read that book. Even the audiobook is great. But like, there's all these little things I think that create part of this like tension and anxiety and this demand on us in our work. And there are opportunities that to simplify that, to help the mental health of everyone along the way, to like decrease the amount of work that's expected of everyone along the way. Things as small as like, you are in touch with the author and there is this horrifyingly triggering thing that happens in this book. Why did no one think to like get that information to the narrator? Like, why is that kind of information not passed along the chain? Or even, how we in audiobooks versus in other space relate to the idea of like a hold. Like someone has sent you an audition and asked you to save this space of time, which for audiobooks is so long, without any kind of consideration or update for when they're going to get back to you, or affirmation of things like that. Whereas in TV, like a hold is a official kind of thing where like that has union rules around what that means, right? So I feel like there are also all these pieces that relate back to like this relationship that we have with the industry that we're in, that like tie back to this like pressure that we're putting onto ourselves, because even as the industry grows, there's so many more narrators, but there are still, and I think more and more of us as time goes on, people who make a full-time living out of this. And so like we are the ones who are the most consistent contractors, the ones who are going to be able to deliver something on time or with a lot of quality, etc. And I feel like we see how these things stack up, and we are best suited to give that kind of feedback to make this sustainable for all of us. Like I don't have an easier experience like at the cost of the producer, or maybe at the cost of the production company if it's like a literal expense, right? But like that's the reason the money's there in the first place. It's none of our personal money. Like let's spend this corporation's money. But I do feel like we can ask things too of this like industry that we are helping run.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of several instances in specifically audiobook land where there have been producers who have very helpfully spoken up saying, hey, it is my job to say no on behalf of the company. And I can only say no if you ask for something, and I actually can't give that to you. But it feels like a significant demonstration of professionalism that you know what you need and you know how to best serve this project, and your job is to be the artist, the storyteller. And so when you come to me and say, I need X, I need Y, I need Z, and I say I can give you X and Y, I'm sorry I can't do Z, we've had that communication, and I have confidence in you. So I do think it's not a thing to be afraid of having a conversation about, for sure. We think about our needs, we think about our limitations in terms of advocating for ourselves, or in terms of signing on yes or no to a project. How about a step before that in terms of what we're choosing to plant in our field, to stick with the metaphor? Like what seeds are you picking and dropping in? Like what do you decide of all of the goodness that's inside of you to volunteer in terms of finding work that does feel really aligned, that does feel that it's not going to compromise you, that perhaps the best point of genesis is leading instead of just answering all the calls, if that makes sense. Does anybody have thoughts about that in terms of this sort of like self-identification process or all of the different platforms in which we can share ourselves? I'd be curious.
I feel like everybody in this room has some version of this, where those stories that you feel align with you sometimes coexist in this space where you know a wound can open up again, or where you know a trauma will exist. You know, like I know so many Black narrators who are like, yes, I absolutely want to tell Black stories. And the more I say that out loud, the more slave books I'm going to get. Or like the more times I say I want to tell queer stories out loud, the more hate crime scenes there are going to be. Like, you know what I mean? Like these things like do happen depending on the world that we're occupying. And I feel like I have tried to navigate that like by one, quote unquote, like reiterating frequently that I play beyond the identities that I have, that I like, you know, have played lots of white characters, have played lots of cis characters, have done all these other things and can continue to do them. But to also like, I know to the degree that I want it to be where I like am willing to let that wound open, and then like what I need when that happens. Like right now, like I feel like every hour I have a new favorite book that I've recorded. But right now, the book that feels like I've been calling it my Roman Empire lately was this like queer immigrant story where I narrated it, and I was like, 85% of this, if I had written a memoir, it would have been this book.
Yeah.
And that book left me down for days after. That book like was heavy on my soul for days after. So I don't know. It feels sometimes like a mix.
But sometimes when I alternately, like maybe this is the creative process that I have developed, which is maybe not very healthy. But sometimes when I take something on that is that weighty, that does feel that full of me and that I have that much to serve the story with, I treat it with a different reverence, and I treat myself with a different reverence through the process. And I go, okay, I will be needing to take a couple days off after this. I will be needing to not go out and party on Friday night this weekend. I will be needing to take my break in the sunshine walking around the block at lunchtime. You know, like whatever it was, as I approach it with more self-care in the process because of the gravity I'm aware of as I walk into the door. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I also try to put, you know, like you said, some of that extra time, that extra space, because I know I'm gonna feel it in my body and my brain and my heart. But also, like when those books come in moderation, I sometimes value the catharsis.
Yes,
like that has
exactly.
always been a function of fiction for me personally. Is like reading about something happening to a fictional character within the bounds of a story, like can sometimes give me the opportunity to cathart a little bit, to like get some of those feelings out in a way that feels quote unquote safe and fictional and separate from my real life. And so sometimes it can be like really healing or really lovely or at the very least it feels important, you know?
Yes.
I did a it's so funny. It was a romance, and you could say rom-com because there was a lot of like wacky hijinks. But also it was like there was a lot of serious stuff, and there was a parent rejecting their child and disowning them, which is something that has happened to me. And like the scene where that character speaks with their father was like, whoo, you know, I was like sobbing my way through it. But also I was like, it's really healing to see this like reflected back in fiction, to be able to like live in that moment in like this fictional world. And also like, I'm repeating myself, I'm so sorry, but like, this sense of like, I felt really privileged to tell that story because I'm like, I feel like I can bring this experience to, you know, this story that has other things that are new to me, but like this resonates. And I felt really lucky that I could like be in that moment with that character, and that hopefully listeners will also be able to relate and resonate. So I really value those books. But then also I definitely go through phases where like, if I've done a lot of heavy books, all of a sudden my reach outs are like, hey, got any comedies? Hey, got any, like, you know, like, what do you got? It's been a little dark over here. And vice versa. Sometimes when I feel like I've been doing a lot of fluff, sometimes I'm like, hey, can I get some meat? Can I get some meat on these bones? Thank you so much.
Yeah, variety. Variety is good medicine for sure.
I kind of got into a groove there where I was just listening as if I were listening to this episode, taking a walk, and I was like, oh, wait, I'm in the episode. Hang on. And then, oh, do I have anything to say? This is where I kind of am negotiating with myself because I feel like I'm in a bit of a different place than all of you as a narrator, because it's not the thing or the main thing that I'm emphasizing in my artistic practice and my artistic career. I am super excited when I get an avail check or when I get an audition and I'm like, oh, I really like this. Yeah, I'll audition. Or like, yeah, tell me about the book. Yeah, let's see what's going on. And it's not frequent enough for me that is a huge contributing factor to my burnout and things like that. So, and I'm even struggling how to describe myself as a narrator. People are like, what do you like as a narrator? I'm like, I get the story. I tell the story. Are you listening around a campfire? Great. I tell the story. But these things that are very close to us, there is that little frisson of like, yes, this is the book I wanted when I was 12. Or this is such a reflection of something that I've been really having heavy on me right now at this age, that I am fortunate enough to be in a place where I'm doing all these other things that when those things come along, and even if that ends up being the bulk of what I get, like I'm just so excited for it and here for it and able to rock with it and kind of manage that load by zhuzhing different levels of different things over here.
Would you talk a little bit about like the things maybe beyond audiobooks that you have been able to let go of when they become too much, or the things you're prioritizing over other things based on your discoveries about your needs? Because I think there are definitely listeners who are not necessarily doing this full time and are also doing other things as well.
Yeah. Ooh, listen. I am still wrestling with and coming to terms within myself and giving myself the spaciousness and permission to realize that I kind of really want to focus on writing right now.
Cool. Yeah.
Like for the past few years, especially with self-tapes, auditions just wear me out, man. I'm cooked after a self-tape. And I'm just, I don't like feeling that way. And I've been in classes, I've been doing stuff, I've taken breaks from classes, I've filled my cup in other ways. I love doing the acting, and especially recently I love doing the voice acting. Anytime if somebody writes an excellent narrative podcast and it's like, will you play this role? I'm like, yeah, buddy. And this audiobooks of like video games, I'm like, yeah, I'm there. I've had to think really long and hard about, will my body support a theater process right now? Or even 3 10-hour days on set?
Yeah.
Maybe not. So, and which is also rough as sort of an indie filmmaker and someone who's really interested in like having the movies I write be made and sometimes being in them and otherwise involved and on set. So these are evolving conversations. But for me, I think it's just taking a step back and letting myself accept in a kind of exploratory, excited way of possibility that no, I think there are stories I want to write right now. And it's okay if that doesn't mean money right now because I have these other things that are paying my rent and my bills.
Right. Yeah.
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 There were like 2 things that you threw out. One is like the relationship of the listener in this experience. Danny and I could swear we were both just in genderqueer, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And like even the joy of just saying to someone, like seeing that book on someone's shelf and being like, oh my God, did you know that they just made an audiobook of that? And that like me and some of my friends got to be like so excited. Like that kind of like, and all the political stuff surrounding that book. But that kind of like moment of connection, or any book, and just being able to like see people's reaction or have that thing, even the wound, and then being able to talk with someone who's read it or even talk with someone who's listened to your performance of it, like that is such a that's like the third dimension of like
Yes.
book conversation sometimes is like I had two friends who listened to a book I did that was just like a fantasy YA romance, and they really enjoyed it. And because I had an opportunity to talk to the author, one fun fact I could bring to them about that book was that the author loved the Vampire Diaries and wanted to like evoke that same, and that like becomes this like dimension of the connection through all of that. And I love that. And I feel like that's a lot of fun. The other thing, and I feel like this especially applies for people who do not do audiobooks full time, it's a marathon and it is a lot of work. And now at this point in my career, if I didn't narrate for like 2 months and then was asked to just drop into 5 straight days of recording like this like 14-hour audiobook, that is a toll on your body. That is a toll on your voice. And the like the ratio, the stamina, like all of those pieces, it's so much work. And sometimes it's hard to feel like the thought process around like why you take that job and your alignment around the text and your like connection to the material is just about joy and just about like, you know, like only about like a financial question, when it can be so like physically taxing actually to do this work. And I could spend 5 days in the studio and another voice actor could spend 30 minutes in a directed session doing a commercial and make the same amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really hard, I think, to land an audiobook specifically and only have a conversation that's about finances or alignment with the material. You know what I mean? Like it's so tiered.
Yes. And wait, so that actually brings up this other question I really wanted to talk about is like, if we are in multiple disciplines or if we are accepting this flow that is right for us and our own boundaries, can we trust that if we don't use it, we won't lose it? And how are we setting ourselves up for success in like the warm-ups and the cool downs and the preparations that like, I know if I'm recording, at 7 to 10 hours of finished audio every week for 6 weeks straight, like I can do a vocal trill and I'm ready to go because I'm warm. I'm like I've been running all for months. But if I take a week off, that first Monday back is like slow and hard and I'm tired and like I need to do the warm up and the cool down and the super hydration and all that stuff. So like Dani in particular, as maybe the person who's representing doing this the most like is sporadically the word I want, like in flux with the other things, in terms of regularity in the system. And then just everybody, I would love to hear your takes on how you think about that.
So is this where we ask me, Dani, how do you warm up and cool down? And what are your, actor homework things that you do? And I reveal my laziness. I know laziness does not exist.
It's not just bird watching that they're lazy about. It's
all over. Because I don't really. I do the day before. I will be very serious about hydrating, but I'm like a thirsty fish of a human anyway, so I'm constantly kind of pounding water.
Yeah.
No diabetes that we know of, just very thirsty. So all the water, all the tea, and then I get in there and I'm just like, yeah, that's just like bleh. I've kind of been singing to myself in the shower or whatever, so I'm not coming to it completely cold. But by the time I get to the studio, I'm like, yeah, let's rock it. Let's do 100 pages today. But I think a lot of what I look for, because these things are so sporadic for me, and it's like when I leave the studio, I'm like, I'll see you when I see ya. Like I usually don't know when the next book is coming. I'm very interested in. I've done all my prep beforehand. I've done the homework. I've prepared the script. I have an idea of who these people are, what they sound like. And although the moments that kind of I can just be in the moment as the text is speaking through me, I'm really interested in cultivating ease within a session.
Yes.
Whatever that means. Sometimes that's taking extra breaks. Sometimes it's bringing my cane because I have a feeling that by the time I stand up at the end of today, I'm going to need it. Yeah. But anything, and even vocally, it's just like, okay, how can this does not need to be super pushed. How can I just let this flow? and not in a, you mentioned narrator voice in an earlier episode, and I'm feeling very amateur and racking my brain going, what is that? What does that sound like?
Do you know? Do you have thoughts? What do you
I don't know. Is it just this kind of very measured, very paced, like, not reportage, but like, you don't need to spike all this the way you normally talk. Like, it's a bit different than the way we normally talk. I don't know. I've gotten that note sometimes. It's like, you have a lot of musicality in your voice. Maybe don't. And I'm like, I don't know. Some people like it.
Yeah.
But also, it sounds like you kind of talk that way naturally.
Yes, I am a Muppet.
Yes.
Right. Like, I think when people are talking about like narrator voice, I imagine you hear somebody like talking and like, oh, this is their voice. This is how they sound. And then they sit down to narrate a book and everything about their voice changes. And you're just like, where did you go? What happened?
Okay. So that, to me, in my brain, that sounds like guided meditation voice.
I mean, listen, that was,
yeah.
And, I mean, I think there's lots of versions. I just think of it as like somebody, because we all have a performance voice, right? Like, it's not, it's because the way a book is written is not the way that I talk necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
exactly.
So you do adjust things for that, or, for that character, for that work, for that text. But I think when people complain about that, they're talking about how somebody making this huge shift between like their natural speaking tone and like their narrator self.
And maybe that like isn't aligned with the text, like, because I feel like if it's truly serving the text and it doesn't sound like you on a podcast, then like you're not going to notice. You're going to be like, great, I'm so in this story, and this narrator is just so aligned with what I'm supposed to be getting from the author's voice. Like, I'm not bothered. But if it's that same meditation zone voice for every text, it's like that's I think
if this book is how to go to sleep, then you are going to get my guided meditation voice, and we're going to be very chill together.
But also, like, that thing about like that piece about like arriving at the text feels relevant, and I feel also ties back to all these other pieces about attention, where like if you have a thriller, like, she ducked behind the counter, the killer came around the side and like looked over and loomed above her. It might be conversational, but it's not right for the text.
True, absolutely.
Let's get it.
Yeah.
Although that could be a really great book too.
Depends on where a narrator is. Like, maybe there's just a little bit of
it's the Gilbert Gottfried reads, 50 Shades of Grey thrillers. But I feel like oh my God, there was a piece you mentioned, Dani, about ease in sessions. Those, overscheduling is changing my life. Overscheduling is changing my life. When I go and I can like take an hour for lunch, or like right now, this was my first week just now that I spent every day of the week directing. And every chapter we ended, we were like, okay, stretch break. You're getting up and you're doing stretches. Or like, like we finish early, and what's the point of like, we have time? What's the point of pumping out all the way to the end of the like scheduled time? Like, let's break. Go rest your voice. Go do vocal trills where you take a 10-minute break because we've already done 4. Like, I feel like we can up the ante on ease in all spaces all the time, and I think people don't like take as much advantage of that as possible at all.
I'm nodding because I've done a word of the year since COVID lockdown, and my word of this year is ease. And since I claimed that word, and it came to me early, it came to me like last summer, and I was like, no, I think ease is the word. And ever since then, kind of like putting everything together that we've talked about so far, I got this one book that was just heartbreaking, and I was like, I need to talk to somebody about this, and I did. Just spoke to a therapist about it and what my feelings were, and just kind of like talked through it. From that one book, it's almost like this thread has gone through. And there's little things that were touched on with different characters from that book that have left the realm of fiction and gone into nonfiction. And with this being an election year, I let a few people know that I was activated, that I felt understand my voice,
Yeah.
my personal feelings and thoughts. And I have these beautiful books that are coming out, that have started coming out, that, is kind of talking about some work that may need to be done and about the health of people overall. And, not just of the few and definitely not of just the 1%. Atrocities and, murders and, unlawful things, and and it just keeps going. And I think it's because I decided to not try to make that happen and almost decided in my ease to do my own version of a year of yes and just let stuff kind of come to me and then decide what I wanted to do and put out and share what I wanted, when and who and how I wanted. Like, I haven't really been super social media driven. I haven't been pumping out content every week. Because I was like, you know what? I got other stuff I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like actually cook at home and,
Ah,
not be in traffic.
God,
Do I
yeah.
really need to get in there? And, as far as like schedules, the on camera stuff is the stuff that I just cannot control. Because to me,
mm-hmm.
all of the pre-production, the post-production of doing an audiobook is very similar to what that schedule would be to do a theater or stage production of something. Right. Even live entertainment, like I'm going to sing with the band. Somebody's got to rehearse. Like, we got to do a sound check. Like, there's just things that have to happen. And I feel like that time commitment is more similar to all the time that would go into doing an audiobook from start to finish. From the yes to the actual, yay, it's coming out. So I feel if I'm doing audiobooks, then something has to give for that same kind of time commitment. So I could pop a commercial in there. I could pop a day or two on set, but to do theater, and I did it for like 6 months, to do theater and audiobooks at the same time, like it's just too much to me, to me. To direct a theater piece, yes, because that's a finite schedule of time, right? And then I can move on, or vice versa. Like André, you're talking about directing, like that's a different commitment from actually being the talent doing the work, right? And so I don't feel like I need to rest as much for that. But doing audiobooks, like all that time in the booth, I need this equivalent. I need the equivalent time silent. And maybe throw a nap in there. Maybe. I might need to lay down.
Definitely.
Right?
For me, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of this thing. I'm like, listening to you talk about your experience, Dani, I'm like, yeah, that's so interesting because something does have to give, right? And so you kind of have to decide, what is that? What is that going to be? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about how I believe Zoom is incredible. I do brunch with people on Zoom. I do cocktails with people on Zoom because I can spend more time with them as opposed to getting in my car and driving 2 hours. I can spend that lovely 2 hours with them on Zoom. Like, I don't see anything wrong with that. And I feel like it's just socially opened up a world that can still be safe and private and not necessarily broadcasting everything, you know?
Yes. All of that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
All of this discussion of like multi-hyphenatism has been interesting because like it made me realize over the course of this I mean, I kind of knew, but to put it into words, like, oh, largely like economics is the greatest overarcher and why I am no longer a multi-hyphenate professionally, because I used to be. I used to do all sorts of stuff. But I mean, frankly, in Chicago, maybe you can be on Chicago Med once a year or whatever, or you can do lots of like really cool, really amazing, really edgy, really brilliant theater for pennies. And there are people who make that work. There are people who have the hustle and the drive and like the connections and the luck or whatever to like make that work for them. But right now I'm like, I feel like all my hustle energy ends up going into audiobooks just because I love the work, because I love the community, because I'm doing the same thing that I loved about theater, which is talking directly to a small audience, which is my favorite thing about it. And which is why, like Dani, I also love like an audio drama, or like a narrative podcast, my favorite. But I mean, and I feel sad about that loss sometimes, but then when I like, anytime I think about, because I still have some theater connections, I still have some groups that I used to work with a ton, however many years ago, and I think would like let me audition again or whatever. I'm always like, well, I would get paid very little. I would be risking greater exposure to COVID, because performing in like a crowd full of unmasked people every night is a very high risk situation. And if I got COVID again, or heaven forbid long COVID, that would affect my ability to make money in my main job. It would require a lot of travel. It would require, like, and not even a lot compared to what Deanna does, but like I'd have to get on the train and go to these theaters and show up for all these rehearsals and performances and like have to stick to that schedule, which I loved when I was doing it and I miss in some ways. But now I'm like, okay, professionally, I am I'm sort of focusing on this single art form, but what can I do as a quote unquote amateur, which I don't think is a bad word, I think is a wonderful word. What can I enjoy just as an artist, as an amateur for fun, to feed my artistic soul in other ways without having to worry about like, is this making me enough money to justify the time,
Yeah,
Oof.
I feel like monetization is a gun and I have to stop shooting my hobbies. Like I feel like I have to step back at some point because like
Yeah.
Dani, when you said you wanted to write, last night my friend and I set aside an hour and a half and we just wrote. And I haven't done that in months. And it was so, and I didn't know what I was writing when I started. And then I sat down and reflected on, and just activating that part of my brain, and then not having to be like, well, now I got to send this off to JMM, or like now I got to like send off an invoice, and it's just letting it sit.
Yes. Oh, I think most of my processes are very slow, which is kind of, it works very much against the social media sort of imperative of these companies. That is because they are very much about, hey, post all your thoughts as they happen right now. You made something, put it out there. Doesn't matter if it's finished. And I'm like, yes, about a thing, maybe just having to satisfy that I'm now saying the thing is done and stopping work on it and it's done. But I mean, The Rushing of the Sea, I think I wrote the first draft of that script in like 2017 or 2018. And then we didn't shoot it until 2021. And it just finished its festival run this month. So for me, these things take time. And I will come up with deadlines for myself. I like having deadlines to a certain extent, but also part of the joy is taking my time. Because that's how the ideas resolve and how they become rich and full of just life experience. That when things don't have a chance to breathe, that doesn't happen as much or as easily. And also like the ability to, because I'm kind of actually a private person. And to me, there's a difference between like something that's personal and something that's private. I can tell you all kinds of personal things about me, but I'm not telling you all my private business. And I think social media likes to collapse that. Or in other, like that sort of, in other ways that the capitalist imperative is like, tell me everything about you so that I can teach you how to market yourself or that I can market you and make money off you. And like, I understand why this is the conversation, but I need to put up this boundary and we need to not do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just tying that needle back into Deanna's not year of yes, your word of the year, ease, like, in February, at the end of February, I missed, and I notoriously was like posting every release every week. I missed one release, and it was like Thursday. I was like, whoops, I forgot. Like, I'll post it with the next ones on Monday, and my like posts had become increasingly more intricate based off of some Canva template that I'd done. And then I went to the Audis, and I was like, well, I got to make a post about the Audis. And that sounded like a bar of work, and I kept putting that off. And I was like, oh, I'll just do it all together. And then I went like to some conference, and I went to another, and I felt Marie Kondo's hand like caress my shoulder, and she said, thank it and let it go. And
Yeah.
I have to circle back to this place. I can't be pumping out things. I can't be creating these lists of expectations. If a moment calls, and I'll post it. And I think I recently did that. But I just like ease, joy. I feel like they have to be at the forefront. They have to be at the table. They have to be having dinner with me.
Yes. Yes. And this essential restorative part of the creative process that you're both alluding to, that is private, that is not watched or monitored or monetized or, quantified, that is just about the quality of your process with yourself, is so nurturing on every level. And, that kind of retreat from needing to produce, I think is just like such a necessary gift that we have to give ourselves.
That also, you reminded me of something that ties back into what Lindsey, you were talking about stepping back from multi-hyphenatism, which sounds like a lovely disease that many of us have, which is part of the reason that I can be a multi-hyphenate and like kind of a la carte go, yes, I'll do a bit of this, yes, I'll do a bit of this, yes, I'll do a bit of this, is I have a regular day gig as well, not related to anything artistic. And that is actually what pays the bulk of the bills. And I am ecstatic when a bit more money comes through from like video game session, book, whatever, day on TV. Yes, thank you. Have me back. I love you. But otherwise I type the news, basically. And
Nice.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. And thank you for to all the therapists who have listened to me process stuff.
Yes.
Not breaking NDA, but just processing things. Stories stay, lessons leave, but that kind of, and who was I talking to about this recently? I'm sure several people, possibly also you, Gail. When Coleman Domingo was doing his sort of press run leading up to the Oscars, he was talking a lot about how growing up where and the way he grew up, he just always understood that, like, okay, being an actor, I'm also a writer, I'm also a director, I am also tending the bar. And as soon as my show on Broadway closes, I go back to the bar. As soon as I close in the West End, I'm going back to the bar. And that is all part of an artist's life.
Yes.
You do not have to constantly be doing only the art and making money at only the art to be an artist. And that is something that I've felt increasingly strongly and keep telling people. I was like, keep going, please keep going.
That's so important to say, and to say often, and for many of us to say, and to say publicly, is that making a living and existing and getting through day to day and making art are not codependent all of the time. You can be in flow with both those things and do it the way that you need to do it. I mean, that's sort of what I'm taking away, I think, from this whole conversation is no one has the right answer about this balance or, which road to follow or where the connections should be made except for you. And that changes every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, the reality of the situation is that this is not an existence for everyone who is an artist, an actor, a writer, to actually be able to do it and have it contribute in any kind of way to their livelihood. Like being a working actor or performer is not a reality for everyone that wishes it to be so. That's just the numbers and just the facts. But also remembering your humanity, right?
Yes, yes.
Again, I think that also has to do with quantity versus quality. And because we do find ourselves trapped in this capitalistic bubble, which is the standard that we must live by because these are how systems are put together, to be able to figure out a way to honor your creative self while you're taking care of your livelihood, I think is a privilege. I think for us, that's a privileged place to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's honesty about all of this is part of unraveling the mirage in the arts of, like, watch me balance all these plates. Look how seamless it is. That early on in my audiobook career, I was like, I bought my studio bricks. I was taking classes. I was doing all this stuff. I had a full-time job that paid me like a solid wage that was funding what was essentially an intricate hobby at that point, versus other people who were without that same full-time job, interested in making audiobooks their full-time space and wondering why they didn't have the money for this, or why, right? And like, you have to tell people, you have to, like, you can't let the mirage exist, because I think that's also a form of like support and self-care, is like conveying this image without without being dishonest about like what has propped it up. And Dani's gonna explode. Connect.
No, I just want to be making so many faces. I want to kind of A to C it a little bit and talk about the mirage of health and our bodily and mental okayness while we're doing all of this. Because there is also such a strong suggestion to be okay. And we've started talking more about mental health stuff and health stuff in recent years. It has started to become more open. But it like Hollywood and other things, many industries are still very much, oh, you have extra accessibility needs? Well, that's going to cost money. Well, we can't do that. And I think coming from the privileged place of, I right now have a day job that works for me, that is, we are doing okay, like, could be better, but we're usually not flailing in a bad way. That supports me very well because I'm in that position of privilege to be able to kind of modulate what else is going on. But I struggle with it all the time. I'm actually in a bit of a scary place right now where I'm like, whoa, this pain and fatigue flare has been going on for a few minutes. Okay. And then going through the process of like, okay, where do I scale back and kind of start from block one? Like, what's my new starting line? And then trying to rebuild from there the things that I had just not questioned for most of my life. And then I was like, oh, clearly this is difficult now. Like, if I do the workout that I had been used to in the morning, 1 or 2 hours later, I cannot stay awake. Okay, let's we got to change that. Like, so it's what was said recently, Deanna, I think you said it. This balance and how we care for ourselves and how we show up in this work and just in our lives as humans is a constantly moving target. And it is going to change throughout our lives. And something I'm really trying to cultivate is a sense of approach and curiosity and joy about that. And a lot of that for me is slowing down and noticing. And that's where the lazy birding comes into play, because I like to take long walks. That's kind of something that I can usually reliably, sustainably do. And just starting to notice, I was like, oh, there's just a little bird there. I was taking a little dust bath. Oh, it's so cute. Wait, what is it? And then walking along the bay and noticing all the different kinds of birds. I can identify most of them now, which makes me really happy. So I just kind of say, oh, hi, double-crested cormorant. How's it going? Listen, I went off on 3 tangents within that monologue that I think the point was that especially as we age, and like I am trying to cultivate this mindset of just feeling so much gratitude and approaching curiosity about still being here. Because when I was young, especially with depression brain, I'm still bad at future visioning, but when I was young, I did not think I would be alive at this age. So every age that I'm successively alive, I'm like, whoa, this world is cool. And we belong to each other. And people are great when they have the space and resources to be. And how do we give more space and resources to more people so more people can be great?
I mean, this is not, I don't have the study to pull up at the moment. So call me out if this fact is nonsense, but I have heard that spending time in awe actually lengthens your life. That going out and wondering about the world in a curious way and letting your brain and your body take in the art of noticing, as you say, actually lengthens and brings quality to your life.
I'll believe it. It's a very childlike state, isn't it? It's how we start.
Yes.
We're just like, what? Why?
Yes.
What is that?
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think that's what I love so much about the work that we do as well is, I think about when, as somebody who really does have showing up every day means a very different thing for me depending on the day. I have a lot of emotional inconsistency and just mental inconsistency with how I can show up. I don't feel it as much of a burden when I'm actually in the work. It's all the stuff around it. Like it's the administrative stuff and the adulting as a human stuff and whatever. But it's like when storytelling, I feel permission to just be in that place of wonder and observation and play. And I think that's why it is a particularly lovely privilege to be able to do this for a living. And a sustaining thing in a way, a nurturing thing in and of itself. I've been struggling a lot recently with some of these deeper questions, so I just want to say thank you all for showing up so fully for this conversation today because it's really helped me. And I've been hanging on to that Rumi quote that, the light shines through the cracks, something like that. The cracks are where the light shines through, I think it is. So allowing myself to crack so that the light can keep shining. So I just thank you for being the nutcrackers of my life. Laughter and tears. Okay. This is so tangentially related, but this is my brain. I used to do Shakespeare in high school with this great program that came from a theater company into our public high school and worked with us. And every day we had to say something that we were excited about and like something that we were, it was called reinforcements. And we'd go like around in a circle and we'd reinforce something. And it was whatever you wanted. But there was this tradition that some of the upperclassmen started and sort of never let go of. And somebody would always reinforce laughter and comedy. And it was like this really lovely thing. But so that since that popped into my brain, can we just like do a short round of reinforcements? And then I'm just going to read us out for today. For like a one word, what do you reinforce?
I'm going to keep coming back to joy.
I'm going to reinforce awe.
I mean, my word of the year is ease, so I'm going to reinforce that.
I was waiting for it. Good, yes.
Yes. I want to reinforce chaos in the context of Chaos Muppets because we always need a little bit more like Kermit flails or kind of just Cookie Monster enjoyment in our lives.
Yes.
And we don't know how things will turn out. So just like things are going to happen. We just rock with them the best we can.
Yes.
The chaos is going to happen. We might as well enjoy it.
Yeah.
I feel like so much of this stuff is like designed to tax us and designed to keep us like driving and exhausted forever. And I think to upset a system like that, to bring chaos to a system like that, I'm all about it.
It's sacred work.
Indeed. Cheers to that. And I'll just say there's been a couple words that have come up tonight, like chaos or lazy, that I'm like, here's to destigmatizing those words because they can be an invitation for awesomeness. So that's my reinforcement. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dani, so much for joining us and bringing this conversation to us today. Thank you all to our listeners for joining us at the Narrator Roundtable. If you want to join the conversation, find us on social media or visit our website, narratorroundtable.com. Submit a question, a topic for discussion for a future episode. What's on your mind? We want to hear about it and we want to talk about it.
Come on. The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.